I have a brief reading from the writings of Martin Luther King to share with you as preface to the sermon. These are excerpts from various speeches. Let us be maladjusted as the prophet Amos, who in the midst of the injustices of his day could cry out in words that echo across the centuries. Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness as an ever-flowing stream. Let us be as maladjusted as Abraham Lincoln, who had the vision to see that this nation could not exist half slave and half free. Let us be as maladjusted as Jesus of Nazareth, who could look into the eyes of men and women of his generation and cry out, "Love your enemies, bless them that curse you." I call upon people of goodwill to be maladjusted, because it may be that the salvation of our world lies in the hands of the maladjusted. God grant that we be so maladjusted that we will be able to go out and change our world and our civilization. The church must be reminded that it is not the master or the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. It must be the guide and critic of the state, and never its tool. If the church does not recapture its prophetic zeal, it will become an irrelevant social club without moral or spiritual authority. Somewhere we must come to see that human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals who are willing to be co-workers with God. We must realize that the time is always right to do right. The words of Martin Luther King. What would Martin do? What would Martin Luther King Jr. do in the wake of the election of 2016? Situated as it is between the farewell address of President Obama and the inaugural address of President-elect Donald Trump, this sermon presumes to suggest what Martin Luther King might have said had he lived. Something about the moral state of the nation. And so to reflect on that, and more importantly, what it might mean for us. I met Martin Luther King, I put that in quotes, at the 1965 memorial service for our Unitarian Universalist minister and martyr James Reed, who was killed in the streets of Selma during a voter education drive. I was there for the memorial service, and Dr. King brushed by me on his way to the pulpit. Though brief, my encounter with his prophetic spirit lingers. I returned for the 50th anniversary of Selma in March of 2015. King did not pull his punches, nor will I. While the pulpit should never be used as a partisan platform, it must be used to call out injustice, no matter where that might be found. His April 4th, 1967 sermon against the war in Vietnam was severely criticized even by his allies in the civil rights movement, as well as, of course, by President Lyndon B. Johnson, on whom he depended so much for good civil rights legislation. King was not a political partisan. He was much more. He was a religious prophet who understood what Amos meant when he talked about dropping a plumb line over the nation Israel as he protested selling the poor for a mess of pottage. He understood what Jesus meant when he said it will be easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. He knew prophecy was not gazing into some crystal ball to predict the future, but speaking truth to power, warning what would happen if injustice were allowed to prevail. we walk in troubled times. I believe the election of 2016 may well be added to the litany of human mistakes enumerated by Barbara Tuchman in her book, The March of Folly, From Troy to Vietnam. So what would King say about the election of 2016? I suspect he would have a somewhat hard time with President-elect Trump, whom we might describe as kind of a sore winner, really, sore winner, given his Tweetiverse attacks on just about everyone except Vladimir Putin. Remembering the biblical warning that pride goeth before a fall, that he who exalts himself will be humbled, King would surely challenge Trump's utter and absolute confidence in himself. He would challenge Trump's incredible claim that he could really run his business and the country at the same time, but he wouldn't, for which we might be thankful. He said, "I am the only one who could do it, but I won't." Last Saturday, my wife Joyce and I attended the theater showing of Verdi's opera Nabucco, about the Babylonian captivity of the Hebrew people in the 6th century BCE, before the Common Era. At one point in the opera, Nebuchadnezzar, Nabucco, in a spasm of megalomania, declared, "I am not a king, I am God," to which a woman sitting near us proclaimed, "Just like Trump." King would challenge Trump and the richest cabinet in history on their wealth, how they acquired it, and what they would do with it. He would question their capacity for empathy and how they might demonstrate a commitment to ending poverty in the midst of plenty. I think King would have been appalled at Donald Trump's attitude toward human dignity, somebodyness, as King called it. He might well have agreed with Meryl Streep, who was offended when Trump mocked a newspaper reporter, a physically challenged reporter who had asked him a hard question. I can still see that image in my eyes, and it's painful. He would have called out the presumably virtuous evangelicals, the infamous sexual harassment tape, when the president-elect said, "When you're powerful, you can do anything you want." Yesterday, he responded to John Lewis's claim the election was illegitimate by denying the iconic civil rights hero and congressman had done anything more in his life than talk, talk, talk. This on Martin Luther King weekend. Now, one can dispute and debate the legitimacy of the election, but not the courage of John Lewis, who bears physically as well as spiritually the marks of being a leader in the civil rights movement with Martin Luther King. And King would have been outraged at the thought of excluding Muslims from this nation or requiring them to appear on a registry. We might recall as a protest, millions of Danes during the Second World War wore the yellow Star of David, which Nazis required Jews to wear. They did it as a protest to that. And so I think Martin might have joined the movement, and I would intend to join the movement that says, "We are all Muslims." I recall my morning conversation with the pastor, the German pastor, Martin Niemöller, in his German home during my 1978 sabbatical. A member of the confessing church, he, by the way, was a submarine commander in World War I for the Germans. But in World War II, he became a member of the confessing church which opposed Hitler. And for his opposition, he spent years in Dachau. He once wrote, "When the Nazis came for the communists, I remained silent, for I was not a communist. When they locked up the Social Democrats, I remained silent. I was not a Social Democrat. When they came for the trade unionists, I did not speak out. I was not a trade unionist. When they came for the Catholics, I did not speak up because I was not a Catholic. When they came for the Jews, I did not speak up. I was not a Jew. When they came for me, there was no one left to speak out." I hasten to add that King would deplore, and I deplore, Hillary Clinton's characterization of Trump supporters as deplorables. As Unitarian Universalists, people may do deplorable things, but are not in themselves deplorable. We regard the worth and dignity of every person as important. And he would have been mightily concerned about her Wall Street connection. So virtue is not the monopoly of any political party. Well, Martin, I think, would probably have wondered about the consistency of Mr. Trump's moral compass. At times a defender of Planned Parenthood, now he wants it defunded. And he once said that women who had abortions should be punished. These constant dramatic changes in position make me wonder with Gertrude Stein if there is any there. Now, beyond this concern with the content of Mr. Trump's character, King would have spoken out against policies that seem to undermine the well-being of the very people who voted in such surprising numbers for him. And Martin would have wondered to what period Donald Trump referred when he talked about making America great again. The good old days were not so good when Jim Crow ruled. Martin remembered them well. 15 years ago, Trump said he was for universal health care, and last September he told 60 Minutes that his health care plan would take care of everybody. Now he wants to repeal and replace Obamacare as the first order of business, though we haven't the foggiest notion what replacement might mean, at least now. On May 15, 2015, he tweeted, "I was the first and only GOP presidential candidate to state there would be no cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid." How then can he now call for repeal of Obamacare, since Medicaid accounts for millions of the newly insured? I too would like to repeal and replace Obamacare with single-payer national health insurance. However, reality dictates we may have to defend what halting progress we have made. Martin, I think, understood that it was not only black people who were exploited by the American economy. White privilege is a topic that we trendy Unitarian Universalists seem to talk about. We almost wallow in guilt at our white privilege. But we need to realize that there are many, many whites who do not feel as privileged as we may feel. Many are downwardly mobile, and sadly, they are tempted to point the finger of blame, not at the economic power elite who are cashing in on an unjust system, but at people of color. I think Trump understood this and appealed to those working class whites, as it turned out, very effectively. I think Martin would have been concerned about the fate of the earth, understood as an ecosystem. Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth, as it says in Genesis. He would, I think, worry that there are several cabinet foxes who have been nominated to patrol agency hen houses. Or there are even skeptics or opponents of the very mission of their agency. We sometimes forget that it was the conservative Richard M. Nixon who inaugurated the Environmental Protection Agency. Let us give him credit. Perhaps the Donald and his minions will accept global climate change as a reality if the golden staircase of Trump Towers in Manhattan goes underwater. Martin Luther King believed that the faith community should bring to bear a prophetic perspective which critiques political positions from a transcendent point of view. It's what I call a God's eye view of the world, a perspective that transcends individual self-interest. What we imagine God's will to be, if only we could know it, and I certainly do not presume to know it. Justice is not fully embodied in any political party. Martin was, and I try to be, an equal opportunity critic. If you think I take Donald Trump to task now, you should have heard me when Lyndon Johnson was pursuing the war in Vietnam, I tried to be a nonpartisan critic. Let the plumb line fall where it may. I follow my religious convictions to my political conclusions. My listeners are encouraged to go and do likewise. But there are some things that transcend left and right. Racism is wrong. Xenophobia is wrong. Islamophobia is wrong. Misogyny is wrong. And America First chauvinism is wrong, at least so it seems to me. I know that many of us are a bit disheartened, especially this week. We may have worked hard on a campaign for candidates who did not win. Democracy is a very messy business. Our plight and our hope is summed up in this sailing metaphor from a 19th century observer. All monarchy is a merchantman which sails well, but will sometimes strike on a rock and go to the bottom. While a republic, meaning a democracy, is a raft which would never sink, but then your feet are always in the water. The survival of democracy, our democracy, is not a given. It is not etched in the very nature of things, not a historical inevitability. Martin might have reminded us of the words of poet Arthur Guterman, whose verse is a prime example of national arrogance and American exceptionalism. Providence that watches over children, drunkards, and fools with silent miracles and other esoterica continue to suspend the ordinary rules and take care of the United States of America. But as I understand the divine, that is not the way the world or the cosmos really works. Martin often invoked the prophetic words, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice." You may be surprised to know that this memorable phrase comes from our very own 19th century Unitarian preacher, Theodore Parker. Parker defined democracy as being of, by, and for the people, a felicitous phrase picked up by one Abraham Lincoln. However, it seems to me, and maybe to you, that this moral arc is getting harder and harder to bend all the time. And surely is not automatic. Democracy is under siege. King knew, as I know and I hope you know, that democracy is not something that we have. Democracy is what we do. President Obama, in his farewell address this week, reminded us that while truths may be self-evident, they are not self-executing. At the same time, he said that the work of democracy is energizing, and I might add, spiritually fulfilling. During a stint of phone banking during the 2016 campaign, I picked up a sticker with a picture of Susan B. Anthony, who was a member of the Unitarian Church of Rochester many, many years ago. And on the sticker with her picture were the words, "I voted today because of her." I had planned to give it to my granddaughter as a token of meaning at the time the first woman was elected President of the United States. Funny thing happened on the way to this grandfatherly nostalgia. Democracy is messy. It is always a work in progress. In the wake of election 2016, I read and reread the pundits, one of whom said, "Serious pessimism seems to be a reasonable default setting." Admittedly, I am just a little bit frightened at what we have to face in the coming years, and I think Martin Luther King would have been frightened a bit too. Arrogance, slogans, tweets are not especially helpful in a complicated time. Simple thinking in a complex world, I think, is a recipe for disaster. Martin's life and death reminds me, in the immortal words of baseball's Leo DeRocher, nice guys, and I would add, and gals, finish last. Most of the prosperity gospel preachers who will decorate the inauguration this Friday believe that their prosperity is a sign of God's will. God had chosen them because they were rich. They were rich because God had chosen them. I can hardly wait to hear their prayers. E.B. White once likened democracy to a baseball game in which we were at the last half of the ninth inning, when the issue was still a doubt. And I, for one, would like to have at least one more chance at bat. But to change the metaphor into a more seasonal sports metaphor, I'm in my fourth quarter. But I'm not yet down to hailing a desperate Hail Mary pass into the end zone. I'm ready, still ready to try to make one first down at a time moving down the field. And knowing ultimately that the game will go on long after I have retired my jersey. T.S. Eliot sadly opined that this is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper. However, I refuse to believe it. I think of one of my favorite cartoons of a bedraggled man in sackcloth and ashes walking down the street and carrying this sign. The world is not coming to an end. Therefore, we must suffer along and learn to cope. So I'm not whimpering. And so as the Trump era unfolds, I find myself once again politically part of the loyal opposition. I would have taken this position no matter the outcome of the election, because that is simply the way, as a religious person, I operate, trying to drop that plumb line over any political administration, no matter the party. Although perhaps it would have been with less urgency had the election gone the other way. Prophetic witness requires envisioning a more just future. On the national scene, I'm afraid I'll be playing defense, for example, defending Planned Parenthood, among other things. Playing defense much of the time, trying to minimize the damage that looms on the horizon. On the state and local level, I cast my lot with, among others, with Interfaith Impact of New York State, which puts me on offense, trying to make the Empire State more just. Religiously, I take a prophetic stance, trying to be for something rather than against. Martin looked at the moral chaos of the Jim Crow and envisioned a beloved community. His prophetic words not only critique the limits of American democracy, but also look to a time of racial harmony, economic equity, and global peace. And so we do need to state what we stand for now and in the future, even as we defend the modicum of justice that now prevails. I'm reminded of the story of the Army scout who was sent out to spy on the enemy. And he was gone several days. He came back and reported to his commanding officer, "There's good news, sir. We can attack on any front. We're surrounded." And so it seems. We will need to prioritize our anger, pace our rage, and plan our response. We will need to use reason, yes, but this election has made very clear to me that people make political decisions more on the basis of emotion than reason. We who tend to be left-brained need to attend to this. The good news is that there are many people addressing many causes, and there is a solidarity in that feeling that I sensed yesterday as I attended an activism fair for 4 long hours touting interfaith impact to hundreds of people who came through the Visual Arts Center in Rochester. The energy was palpable. And the beautiful thing, I saw many old-timers like myself who have been at the barricades for a very long time, but I saw many, many energetic young people whom I had never seen before who were there ready to work, and it inspired me. While the political pundits will make hay of what has happened, angry white men, 2 unpopular candidates, a brawling campaign, voter suppression, Russian hacking, FBI intruding, I try to take a longer view. Because when you're 80 years old, you can remember many such times just like this. It gives one some perspective. Been there, done that. Too many times. But I'm still here. Martin might have been discouraged to note the replacement of a black president with a person whose real convictions remain cloaked in mystery. King was often discouraged. But then I remember his I Have a Dream speech on the Mall in Washington, D.C. in 1963. I was there. I think of the jailings he endured, but also of a letter from a Birmingham jail in which he noted that the time was always right to do right. I think of the sharp rebukes he received for his anti-war sermon and the ill-fated Poor People's March in Washington, which did not move the nation. And finally, I think of his prophetic words on the last night of his life as he was working for the Memphis sanitation workers. He said he might not make it to the promised land, but he said that we as a people, we will go into the promised land. And hearing those words now, even 50 years later, sends a chill up and down my spine. This is no time for mourning. No time to retreat into our contented cocoons. This is not a time to rely on some charismatic leader to tell us what to do. Not a time for self-pity. Not a time for if only. Not a time to withdraw into our liberal bunkers, to hunker down and let some prophetic figure come to the rescue. It is a time for our prophetic witness to speak out, to agitate, to be the change we want to see in the world. Martin said, the church must be reminded that it is not the master or the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. It must be the guide and critic of the state and never its tool. If the church does not recapture its prophetic zeal, it will become an irrelevant social club without moral or spiritual authority. Well, I don't really know what Martin would have said or done. I can only say what I believe and what I intend to do, what conscience calls me to do. And so I affirm the ministry of showing up, being there in love and justice. And I leave you with such a story from the first White House protests for women's suffrage 100 years ago. As the 19th Amendment was being approved one state at a time, it seemed that the issue hinged on the decision of the volunteer state, Tennessee. It all came down to a deciding vote cast by a 24-year-old state senator who was known for his opposition. However, one fateful day, he received a telegram from his mother, and he changed his vote. The rest is history. History which is ours, not to observe, but to create. Amen.
Join us for worship every Sunday at 10 a.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, a welcoming congregation. We are located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of South Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Look for the blue signs just before the turn. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370 or at our website, www.canandaiguauu.org. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.